Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and welcome to episode 172. And on this week's episode of the Film Realist Podcast, I will be reviewing Predator Badlands, the latest in the Dan Trachtenberg area of the Predator universe. I'm very excited to chat about this. There will be a non-spoiler section of the review as well as a spoiler section, so if you haven't had a chance to see the film, there's no need to worry. And then I will wrap up the episode by responding to listener mail and question of the week responses. Let's get into the Badlands with the Predator right now. I think that audio clip is the best possible way to intro this film, which is, for the first time in a film, we have the Predator, or the Yautja. I'm gonna put my cards on the table, which is, I've seen all the films. I did my ranking. Obviously, that didn't include Predator Badlands on a tier list last week, and I would describe myself as a casual fan of this franchise. And what's most compelling about this movie is we get a Predator as the main character, and that's such a selling point because the introduction of those characters, or this species, and this franchise was as these terrifying villains. You go all the way back to Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, directed by John McTiernan, and it is so compelling to have such a terrifying creature absolutely obliterate the machoist men of that decade. And this story, and we've seen this in clips in the marketing, which is allowed to be discussed in this portion of the review, which is he is sent on this planet to kill this creature as his first hunt. He is the runt of the family, and you get to see a lot of subtitles because there are substantial characters in this who only speak the Yautja language. That is, our main Predator, of course, speaks that, but the back and forth with the actual culture provides an insight unlike anything we've seen before. We've gotten bits and pieces of what it means to be a part of the Yautja culture, as well as just being a predator from their planet. But this is so much more specific and intimate, which helps add so many more layers to these characters and this franchise in general. What I really appreciate about what Dan Trachtenberg has brought to this is that it is really difficult to work in a franchise that you are a fan of. It can wind up feeling like glorified fan fiction, or that you're too afraid to change anything, to add anything new, to add fresh perspective. And in each of the properties he's worked on with this franchise, we've gotten to see something different from this universe as a whole. Of course, the Predator franchise spawned how many films that were made independently on their own. And then, of course, we have the Alien vs. Predator franchise, which is in its own little pocket. And then you have the Alien franchise on its own as well. I just discussed Alien Earth this year, and that was a whole different thing, going for the prestige element of television, where what's so fun about this movie, and the main goal, if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, is evaluating a movie's goals as opposed to comparing each and every movie to each other, because each piece of art, every film, every TV show, every video game, they are trying to achieve specific emotions from its audience, whether that be comedy, sadness, drama, hilarity, horror, scaringness, thrill-seeking, all those things. Not every movie can cover all of those quadrants. They're trying to do a specific thing. And Dan Trachtenberg with Prey, revitalizing this franchise and showing how awesome it can be when you just have an incredible lead, as well as showing what the Predator can be like in a different setting. It's one of the reasons I loved Terminator Year Zero, because it's something different, pitching that universe somewhere else. It doesn't necessarily have to be the John Connor family that all of the Terminator films outside of, I don't even think any of, no, he's been in all of them. But expanding this world, also using it in a canonical way to continually add to the tapestry that is this franchise. I am sure that there are going to be elements of this movie that are there for diehard fans. But something that I appreciate being a casual fan of this is I'm invested in this individual specific movie. Yes, it's amazing when you can connect and have those Easter eggs. If you're a longtime listener, you know how much I love a bunch of different franchises: Doctor Who, Star Wars, DC Universe, Marvel, all sorts of others. And getting those to be parts of the story make the investment in the overall franchise definitely worth it. And this really does feel like a step forward in bridging those gaps. Alien vs. Predator is something we're aware of. This is in the marketing. Elle Fanning is playing a synth, and synths, of course, obviously with the focus of Alien Earth, but they are a robotic creation that is a part of the Alien universe. So we know that these franchises are connected, going all the way back to Predator 2, when we saw the skull of a xenomorph inside the Predator ship. It is canonical that these things share a world. It's been interesting because the Predator films, of course, have mainly focused on Earth in contemporary times, where obviously the Weyland-Yutani of it all and the scientific exploration of Earth within that universe and where it was in the scientific genre or science fiction genre was much different than what we were getting from Predator. And this movie is so entertaining, it's so funny, but at the same time, and I think this is a win where, no, this movie is not overly complicated. It is not prestigious for the sake of being prestigious. It's not high-minded in a way where it feels condescending with its concepts. It is broad stroke storytelling at its finest. And what I mean by that is you have your main character who goes on their hero's journey. It's a very simplistic evaluation of a character's main plot and the narratives introduced. You have challenges and hurdles they overcome. There's a great tragedy in the beginning of the story that motivates them to go on the journey that they go on. And using simplistic storytelling allows the audience to be invested in what's happening. And also, you don't waste time on a ton of exposition because you understand what is going on. What's most interesting in watching a movie like this is the action and getting to see the Predator be the focus. He doesn't have to be that skulking nightmare of a character when the planet itself is designed to kill you at every waking moment. And putting the Predator in a setting like that with somebody who is expecting success and does not get it all the time because this is the worst place in the galaxy to go for his first hunt, which is an honorary tradition amongst the Yautja, but also bridging the gap by having this be an adventure and quite literally a road trip with Elle Fanning and the Predator played by Demetrius Schuster Kolamatangi. I'm trying my best to pronounce that. I'm really sorry if I did mispronounce it, but I did try a couple times before recording the episode. And the back and forth between those two characters is so interesting because, yes, it is, of course, a creature that would only exist within the Alien universe being a main character in the Predator one. And their back and forth is so compelling because their approach to the world is so different. You have two completely different cultures butting heads as they go on this shared journey, attempting to achieve the same goals. And obviously they have their own ideas. And I think getting to see somebody butt heads quite literally with that person being the Yautja and saying like, hey, I understand your culture because the whole thing with Weyland-Yutani is exploration and garnering knowledge and gathering that and creating the perfect human through the exploration of science. But you get to see somebody who has lived in their own bubble getting introduced to other opinions and ideas, which from a meta commentary standpoint, it's just hilarious how approachable all of this is within a Predator movie. The Predator itself is compelling as a main character because of the hero's journey that Deck goes on his own. The movie is thrilling, it's exciting, it's really funny. I know this is something that, Jermaine, I know you're listening, you wanted to know about, which is this is a PG-13 movie, but in context of the film itself, yes, you are not getting the violence of dismemberment of human beings that you would expect. But in terms of adapting a R-rated franchise into the PG-13 rating, or PG if you're Canadian like myself, you don't miss any of that in the way that the action is used itself. I really liked, more than anything, getting to follow along with the Predator himself, not having to wonder what was going on, and seeing his skills evolve as the movie goes along. Everything introduced in the movie, or every action sequence, is a learning moment for Deck, and he gathers all of those ideas in what leads him into the conclusion of the movie, which again seems like such a simplistic and basic way to tell a story, but this sort of movie used to exist in the late 80s and the early 90s, and it's a sentiment that I agree with, that I had seen online, which is a movie like this doesn't really get made successfully anymore, whether this is due to budgetary constraints or not necessarily having a succinct creative vision. And Dan Trachtenberg, 3 projects into this universe, clearly has an idea of where he wants to go. It was trending a lot online that he's had 3 ideas after Prey, and he's done 2 of them. But the Alien franchise has been so stuck on being so simplistic in its recreation of things we've seen before, or the complete opposite. I was not a fan of Alien Romulus. I thought the first half was a great new concept within the franchise, and then it devolved into, we only have so much time and we don't know if we're going to get to expand on all these great ideas. We're just going to shove them all into the third act of the movie. Alien Earth evaluated something else within that universe, specifically getting to show us what Earth is like under all of these companies. But Predator Badlands really does feel like a turning point for these franchises. I want Dan Trachtenberg at least involved and in control of where we go moving forward. He has a clear understanding of that balance of fandom, but also understanding that you need to do new and interesting things with this. We got that from Prey. Predator Killer of Killers, I didn't love as much as that, but Predator Badlands is the perfect 90s action movie mentality with today's capabilities that I was so enthralled with, and I had so much fun that if it's a direct sequel to this, I would definitely watch that. Or if it's, I have an idea to kind of be a conclusion to this part of the story, because in his mind, all of the films are canonical, which I do appreciate. You're not throwing things out that people didn't necessarily love. We're continuing to add to this mosaic, as opposed to being nitpicky and removing bits and pieces that not everybody loved, or maybe there are portions of the fan base that might have loved them. This movie is wildly entertaining, and again, I've said this already, but I'm going to say it again. I'm a casual fan of this franchise. I think if you are a longtime fan, you are going to like it even more, because it gives you everything you would expect from a Predator film, but at the same time offers up so many new and fun things that add to what these movies can be, and I'm really looking forward to whatever we get next. That's all I can say in non-spoilers. Now let's jump into spoilers. We can really get into the nitty-gritty and all the really cool twists and turns of Predator Badlands.
Hello, Tessa. The company is not pleased. Continued failure will result in your decommission.
Where's Thea?
The Yautja has Thea.
Now, I chose to use that clip because it addresses something that is in the marketing if you're paying attention, but I didn't want to spoil that because, some people don't watch anything, which is Elle Fanning is actually playing 2 different synths. And what's so fun about that is we get to see so much of Elle Fanning's range. She's been in so many different projects, but this really does allow an opportunity, specifically in this movie, to allow a mirror with our 2 main characters, which is Deck's brother saves him from what was going on. He is killed not Deck. His brother is killed by his dad, who is the leader of his clan, because he is a runt, and the Yautja cannot have any weakness within their crews. And he sends his brother off, Kwai, sends Deck off before his death to accomplish his first hunt and bring honor to himself and to the pride in killing this great big monster that is supposed to be like the boogie monster of the planet that he's going to. What's cool is Thea, who teams up with Deck, is the wanderer, the scientific gatherer of information. She's not the explorer. She is not the brute force, the tactical thinker that her twin sister, Tess, another synthoid, is. And what's really awesome about those two characters is you get to see a dynamic that is not dissimilar from the one that Deck has with his brother Quay. And yes, this could be evaluated as kind of on the nose and too simplistic, but in a Predator film, what I appreciate is it allows for this nuance in these relationships. These messages and the story being told work because the film provides you two opportunities of showing the complete opposite of how they were treated. Tess looks down at Thea, and Quay, while understanding that his brother does not have the same physical attributes that other Yautja have had, still believes he should have an opportunity to prove himself. And it's that drive for vengeance at also wanting to redeem the fact that his brother was killed is Deck's motivation. And I really like that his relationship with Thea does help form who he is and turns him into a better predator. As a warrior, he goes in with this blind methodology based on his upbringing, and it is only when he starts listening to Thea that he finds more success on this planet. Ultimately, as I said this in the non-spoilers, each of the attacks or near misses or encounters he has with species on the planet ultimately lead to him having success with his overall victory, which is he doesn't ultimately kill the Kalisk, which is the main monster. He winds up killing Tessa because the Kalisk winds up being the mother of a creature that has befriended Deck while they've been on the planet. And what's so funny about that situation to me is the introduction of that character. Essentially, if you haven't seen the movie, picture like Boots from Dora the Explorer, but if he was mixed with Golem the Pokemon. So he is still blue and monkey in shape, but he has like a very hard, rough exterior. And what makes the Kalisk this unbeatable monster is it has essentially the same healing factor, if not even better than Wolverine. So it is essentially unkillable. I've said essentially too many times, and I'm going to stop saying it for the rest of the episode. And it's only through having these specific experiences that Deck is able to learn how to use what is on this planet as weapons, as defense, to take down a army of synths sent by Weyland-Yutani because they are all also after the Kalisk. And what I appreciate also with Thea's character is she's pitched as this very friendly person, but still, as we know with Weyland-Yutani synthetics, they have missions to achieve. Yes, we've seen individual personalities go against their programming, and that's a story for a different time. But in the movie, we get to see that scale of choice. They're given emotion, and ultimately, Thea does side with Deck because they come to realize that the Kalisk is not just this bloodthirsty monster. It likely was searching for who winds up being Bud, the creature that's joined them on their journey. And Tess is much more in line, and Elle Fanning said this, and I really appreciate that you can see this in the performance, is very much in line with something like Michael Fassbender's synthetic in Prometheus, which is very different than what we've seen in other films, specifically with David, and we got a very different style synth in Alien Prometheus, but getting the opportunity to see the duality, and yeah, there are still characters like ones we've seen before. And this kind of fan service is not just in the movie for the sake of it, which is the best part of how Dan Trachtenberg has adapted these two franchises into a proper film that's not just, hey, we put them together and we didn't really think about anything. You get essentially the ending of Aliens in this movie, but what's so fun is you're not wanting the winning to be the synthetic. Tess is in the big robot, and you want the callus to win. You are cheering for the aesthetically unpleasing creatures, that being Deck as well as the other aliens on the planet. I mean, they would be natives to the planet, to succeed. The synthetics sent by Weyland-Yutani are the bad guys. It is creatures versus humans, and the success only comes from them working together, which goes completely against what Deck has learned as a predator, which makes him even more terrifying. And I love the comeuppance that we do have in the movie, which is he goes back to Yautja with Tessa's synthetic skull, brings it to his father, who's like, great, you killed this. This doesn't really matter. You're still the runt of the litter. And we see all of the skills that Deck picked up while he was on Jenna. And he ultimately kills his father, getting his cloak, which is the thing that it's the invisibility that they receive after winning their first hunt or bringing back their first hunt. They're winning the skull or whatever, the game, to show that they've achieved this. They can be a Yautja, only for the success to come with Bud growing up to look like the Callus, and Thea is there, or Thea, only for his mom to be on the way, which I think is hilarious that his parents are running in different clans, but of course they are in Yautja culture. It's just so entertaining. It's the best kind of action movie, which is you care about the character's success. It doesn't bog you down in motivation. It's simple, and I'm okay with that being the case when it's done well. You don't have to have this level of depth that just seems obnoxiously contrite. You have revenge and a character wanting to prove themselves. They start off in tragedy only to ultimately overcome that tragedy with the help of others. And that's why this movie works. It's funny. It's entertaining. The action is really well choreographed. It's awesome to see a Yautja in broad daylight doing incredibly physical things, maneuvering around, problem solving based on circumstances. This is the Predator movie that I would honestly show people who aren't even fans of Predator as a franchise. You don't need to know anything, and the success in itself is that, because you don't need to know anything. I appreciate this movie being a casual fan. Diehard fans will love all of the different connective tissue to the past franchise. And is this going to lead into a sequel of him fighting his mother's clan? Quite frankly, I don't really want to see that, because I'm much more interested in seeing what the grander story that Dan Trachtenberg might want to do with this franchise. It's awesome to see Predator be made that isn't bogged down with anything we've had in the previous franchises. It's faithful to what you are familiar with, while at the same time doing something wholeheartedly unique. And it's in a time when people really do complain about sequels and remakes, to get a continuation of a franchise that brings elements from completely different movies. You get an synthetic very similar to David. You get a battle sequence, like I said, that's very reminiscent of Aliens, while also getting essentially Deck living his own experience similar to the one that Arnold had in the first Predator. This makes this, in my opinion, probably one of the best Predator films. It's definitely up there with Predator and Prey. I would recommend Badlands to anybody who just wants to have a good time in a good way. Not, oh man, if I think about that for 5 minutes, this movie's not very good. That's really frustrating. And so far, Dan Trachtenberg has never delivered that in the Predator franchise. You should definitely check this out on the big screen. That will do it for my spoiler thoughts on Predator Badlands. Let's jump into question of the week responses and listener mail.
Can I ask you a question?
Just one?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it. Last week's question of the week was, who would you like to see the Predator fight next? Scotty Cameron writes in, I'd like to see the Predator enter the world of Star Trek and fight Klingons. That would be super cool. Now, which era of Klingons, Scotty? That's the thing I'd be most curious about. Dylan writes in, I wouldn't want this as a movie, but as a comic. Predator versus Kraven the Hunter would be cool. You don't want to see him fight Aaron Taylor Johnson, Dylan? On YouTube, RayDabed3834 says, versus The Undertaker, I think a wrestler, regardless of physical prowess, would be absolutely destroyed. Christopher Snyder, R8D3E, says, Batman? Christopher Snyder, which Batman? You're going to have to let me know. Garrett McLean says Venom, and then Father Figure It Out says versus the Spartan army would be a worthy battle. Those are all really cool answers, and I like how we got a bunch of different physical ones. Nobody, interestingly enough, maybe outside of Batman, picked anybody with a real tactical prowess, which, if you watch some of the Predator films, you normally don't win just based on size. You have to outthink the Predator. At least in my experience, that's been my observation. So thank you to everybody who submitted their answers for Question of the Week. This week's Question of the Week, it's probably controversial, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Next week's review is going to be of The Running Man, directed by Edgar Wright, starring Glenn Powell. So I'm curious, what movie of Arnold Schwarzenegger's would you like to see be remade? I know people in the comments are already going to be like, they did Total Recall and it was so bad. But I'm curious, if somebody actually had a really unique take, and I know with Edgar Wright, they're going much more to the novel as opposed to what was done with The Running Man in the original film in the 80s. So I'm curious. To let me know, you can email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com. You can comment below on YouTube and Spotify, or you can hashtag QOTW on any of the social medias. I go through them all. Please let me know. If you haven't yet, subscribe on YouTube. The podcast is less than 100 subscribers away from the first step of monetization. And if you haven't and you're listening to this for the first time, thank you so much for listening. Make sure you follow on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss the next episode, and leave a 5-star review because it helps the podcast reach more ears and get recommended on more platforms. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're here for The Running Man next week. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.